Have you ever noticed how we often know bits and pieces of the Bible but have no idea how it all fits together? Maybe you've heard of Moses, Abraham, the Exodus, the Ten Commandments. But do you really understand how all of this is part of a bigger plan carefully designed by God from the very beginning of creation to the coming of the Messiah? The truth is, most people only know the surface. Few realize that behind every story there's a deep connectiona hidden thread that reveals the love, justice, and eternal purposes of the Creator. And listen, if you think this is just for theologians or seminary students, forget it. This knowledge is for me, for you, for anyone who truly wants to understand why humanity exists, why we suffer, and what the redemption plan is, a plan that started in Genesis and continues to this very day. Get ready, because today we're going on a journey through time from creation all the way to the coming of the Messiah. A journey full of surprises, wars, alliances, betrayals, promises, miracles, and of course, revelations that you've probably never heard before. And I guarantee you after this, you'll never look at the Old Testament the same way again. In the beginning, God took the first step into time and everything came into existence. He created the heavens and the earth, separated light from darkness, shaped the oceans, formed the animals. And at the height of creation, He made human beings in His own image, Adam and Eve. Nothing was random, everything had a purpose. Think about it. A God so powerful that He creates everything with just His words, yet still cares about the smallest details, our breath, our emotions, even our ability to love. That alone tells you a lot about who He is. And more, He entrusted mankind with the care of Eden, showing from the very beginning that a relationship with God involves responsibility. But, as you probably know, things didn't stay perfect for long. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had everything: fellowship with God, abundant provision, peace. Only one rule: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's exactly where the enemy, through the serpent, found an opening. Temptation came in quietly, disguised in half-truths and lies. Eve gave in. And so did Adam. And in that instant, something broke. The fall wasn't just disobedience, it was the moment sin entered creation. From that point on, humanity was marked by separation from God, by pain, by spiritual death. Right after the fall, the consequences hit home literally. Their sons, Cain and Abel, were the first to offer sacrifices to God. Abel did it with his heart, offering his best. Not so much, it was more out of obligation than love. And God sees intentions. He always does. Jealousy, envy, and pride consumed Cain. And in a brutal act, he murdered his own brother. Sad, isn't it? But hey race, what's incredible, even in that brokenness, God didn't abandon humanity. After that, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth. And through Seth came a line of people who chose to walk with God, keeping alive the hope of redemption. Time passed, and humanity only got worse. Evil spread like a plague. People were consumed by sin, violence, and corruption. So God decided to hit reset. But listen, He didn't give up on us. He found one righteous man in the middle of all the wickedness: Noah. God gave Noah a mind-blowing mission: build a massive ark, something that had never been seen before. Imagine people laughing, calling him crazy as he hammered away, day after day. But Noah trusted. He obeyed. And through that ark, God saved Noah, his family, and pairs of every animal species from the flood that wiped out the wickedness of the earth. When the floodwaters receded, Noah and his family were given a second chance, a fresh start. From there, 3 family lines were born that would shape the future of humanity: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Each became the ancestor of nations you've definitely heard of. Shem became the father of the Semitic peoples, including Abraham, Israel, and ultimately the Messiah. Ham became the father of many African and some Asian nations. Japheth became the ancestor of European peoples. You see, even here, God was already putting together every piece of the redemption plan. And from all the nations that came after Noah, God chose one man to start a covenant that would change everything: Abraham. Imagine hearing God say, "Leave your country, your family, and go to a land I will show you." And on top of that, God promises to make him the father of a great nation. Abraham believed, and that faith made him the father of faith. Then came Isaac, the child of the promise, born when Abraham and Sarah had zero human hope left. Then Jacob, who literally wrestled with an angel and had his name changed to Israel. From him came the 12 tribes that would become God's chosen people. Can you see it? The plan is unfolding. And there's so much more to come. Among Jacob's sons, Joseph stands out. But not in an easy way. He was his father's favorite, the family's dreamer, and his brothers hated him for it. The result? They sold him into slavery, and he was taken to Egypt. Can you imagine? From beloved son to slave in a foreign land. It must have felt like the end. But watch how God works. Even in the middle of betrayal, injustice, and prison, Joseph never lost his faith. And right there in Egypt, he became the governor, the second most powerful man in the empire. And the most incredible part? He used that position to save his family from starvation, proving that even the worst pain can be transformed into purpose by God. Time passed. And that family that arrived in Egypt as guests became a massive nation. But as they grew, oppression came. The Pharaoh, afraid of their strength, enslaved them. Centuries of suffering, humiliation, and hard labor followed. It seemed like God had forgotten them. Spoiler, he hadn't. Enter Moses, a baby saved from the Nile, raised in Pharaoh's palace, who later fled into the desert. Only to one day hear God's voice from a burning bush go, "Set my people free." Can you feel the weight of that calling? Moses returned, confronted Pharaoh, and started one of the greatest liberation stories in human history. And then, the showdown between God and the greatest empire of that time began. Supernatural plagues, rivers turned to blood, swarms of locusts, darkness, the death of the firstborn. All to show that no Pharaoh stands against the God of Israel. And finally, the people didn't just escape Egypt, they marched out like an army of freed people. On their journey, God didn't just part the Red Sea, literally part it, but he also delivered something that would change the entire world, the 10 Commandments. These weren't just rules, they were principles for life, for justice, for holiness. This was the moment when God officially formed a people with a spiritual, cultural, and divine identity, guided by the Torah. On Mount Sinai, God didn't just give the 10 Commandments. He revealed the entire Torah manual for life, for spirituality, for community. This was a covenant. It wasn't just about being free from Egypt, it was about being free from sin and the chains that enslaved the soul. Every law, every detail had a purpose to prepare the people to live as a holy nation. But who said it would be easy? The journey to the Promised Land was full of challenges, complaints, disobedience, idolatry. The result? An entire generation wandered the desert and never saw the promise fulfilled. Only their children did. And it was Joshua who led them into the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Under Joshua's leadership, the people finally entered the Promised Land. And it wasn't handed to them on a silver platter. There were battles, strategies, and divine intervention. Remember the walls of Jericho? They collapsed just at the sound of trumpets and obedience to God. But after Joshua's death, the people entered a spiritual roller coaster, obeying for a while, falling away soon after. Then came the judges, leaders raised by God to deliver Israel from their enemies. There was Deborah, a fearless woman and prophet who led an army. Gideon, who won a war with just 300 men. Samson, a man with supernatural strength. And a very questionable choice in women. And Samuel, the last judge and a prophet who prepared the way for something new, the monarchy. The people started looking around and thinking, we want a king like the other nations. And even though it wasn't God's original plan, he allowed it. So Saul became Israel's first king, handsome, tall, strong. Seemed perfect on paper, but his lack of obedience made him lose God's favor quickly. Then came David, the shepherd boy who defeated Goliath and won God's heart. A flawed man, sure, but a man after God's own heart. His son, Solomon, became the wisest king in history. Under Solomon's rule, Israel saw its golden age: peace, prosperity, and the building of the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, where God's presence dwelled among his people. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom greed, ego, and a lot of disobedience. The northern kingdom became Israel, with 10 tribes. The southern kingdom became Judah, with 2 tribes, and kept Jerusalem and the temple. And from there, things went downhill. Israel dove headfirst into idolatry, led by kings who did everything but follow God. Judah had a few kings who tried to set things right, but most chose spiritual corruption. And in the middle of this chaos, God raised up men to be his voice, the prophets. When everything seemed lost, God wasn't silent. He raised prophets, ordinary men with an extraordinary mission, speak truths no one wanted to hear. Isaiah preached judgment but also hope and gave shocking details about the coming Messiah. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, warned Judah of the disaster ahead. But no one listened. Ezekiel had mind-blowing visions, wheels of fire, heavenly thrones, and the promise that God would restore his people. Daniel lived among Babylonian kings and, even far from home, showed that God reigns over every empire. And then came Malachi, the last prophet before a long silence. His message was clear: the Messiah is coming. Get ready. And guess what? Everything the prophets warned about happened. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple burned to the ground. The people were taken captive to Babylon, 70 years in exile. But even there, God didn't abandon them. He even used pagan kings to fulfill his purposes. Can you believe that King Cyrus of Persia issued the decree for the Jews to return home? The return wasn't easy. Zerubbabel led the rebuilding of the temple. Ezra, a scribe passionate about the Torah, revived the people's spiritual life. And Nehemiah? Oh, he was the guy who looked at Jerusalem's broken walls and said, "Let's rebuild this." With courage, faith, and even swords in hand, they didn't just restore the walls, they reignited the hope of an entire nation. But after the rebuilding, tension grew. The Samaritans, descendants of Jews who had mixed with other nations, were now seen as traitors or impure. This sparked a rivalry that lasted for centuries. And then, the prophetic silence began. The famous intertestamental period, about 400 years without a single prophet. In that time, the world changed completely. Alexander the Great swept across the map, spreading Greek culture everywhere, including Judea. The language changed. The philosophy changed. The mindset changed. It's like God was preparing the world stage, adjusting every piece for something even bigger. Then came the Greeks trying to erase Jewish faith. Enter the Maccabean revolt, a group of warriors who fought with swords to defend the Torah, cleanse the temple, and keep the covenant alive. This is where the celebration of Hanukkah comes from. Soon after, the Roman Empire took over everything, including Judea. And who did Rome put on the throne? Herod the Great. A paranoid king who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened his power, including innocent babies, as seen in the massacre of the innocents. Yet even amid this political chaos, wars, and oppression, a deep expectation burned in the people's hearts: the coming of the Messiah. For centuries, the prophets had declared it. Every promise, every vision, every sign. It all pointed to him. The people expected a warrior king, someone who would overthrow Rome and restore Israel by force. But God had a far greater plan: a Messiah who didn't come just to break human chains, but to shatter the chains of sin, the fall, and death itself. And so, in the perfect moment, Jesus is born. The fulfillment of everything that started back in Genesis, in Eden, when God promised that the offspring of the woman would crush the serpent's head. The Messiah came not just for Israel, but for all humanity. The entire story of creation, the fall, the Exodus, the prophets, the kings. Every part of the Old Testament connects to one word: redemption. Now let me ask you, after knowing this entire story from Genesis to the Messiah, can you still look at life the same way? You can't. You realize that nothing is random. Every detail, every generation, every promise is part of a perfect plan that God has been writing since the beginning of creation. And hey race, my final question for you: what's your place in this story? Because if there's one thing this journey teaches us, it's that God is still writing chapters, and the next one could be about you. Are you living like someone who understands God's purpose? Like many in the past, are you distracted, lost among the noise of this world? If this message made sense to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. And hey, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, because here we're going to keep unlocking the mysteries of the Bible, diving deeper into faith, purpose, and learning how to truly live a life aligned with God's plans. Let's grow together in this journey.